Pressure. It's something that we talk about, but we really don't pull back the layers on it. You might have heard the phrase that a diamond is created under pressure. So we can start to think that pressure creates something beautiful. Well, there's a flip side to that too. And the idea that pressure can also compound into a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, which so many of us are feeling. That is what we're talking about today, is how do you show up in the light of pressure? And are you doing the things that you need to do to take care of yourself when these triggers happen? So today we're talking about how we can step up and understand the importance and the clarity in mental wellness. I'm Clara Capano, and this is another episode of Clarity in Action. Welcome to Clarity in Action. This is the show where we have real conversations that are going to challenge your perspectives and drive real action. So if you are tired of holding back and you're ready to make bold moves, this is the show for you. Join us as we are going to take you from confusion into clarity. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Clarity in Action. Today is going to be an important one that you're going to want to bookmark and come back to, because we are talking all about the importance of mental wellness. As high achievers, which many of us are, we go out there and we tend to burn the midnight oil. We push ourselves to our limits, and it's sort of a blessing and a curse. It's a wonderful thing because it's how we achieve greatness. At the same time, it can also be a detriment. So today I have my friend Brian Sachetta here to talk with us all about clarity of mental wellness. So Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clara. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited too, because I think this is a topic that doesn't get enough exposure and enough real perspective. You know, we are told all about this thing called hustle culture. You know, we're taught, oh, if you want to have success, you got to put in your dues and work the long hours and get the title and check off all the boxes. And even though I think there's a little bit of truth in the fact that we have to put the hard work in, we can't do it at the detriment of our own mental being, which is what too many of us learned the hard way. You have once referred to yourself as your own favorite science experiment when it comes to this. And I would love to start off by asking, what was your moment of clarity that led you to understand the importance of mental wellness as it pertains to growth and success?
Can I cheat and give two answers?
You certainly can.
So I did have a different answer prepared. And then the way that you asked the question, I'm like, I might have a second answer. So let's start with the second answer. So It was like me answering the question from the perspective of what made me realize the importance of all of this, right? So story that I often tell that is in my first book, at the beginning of the first book, is I went off to college. I had been dealing with anxiety in my own life. I didn't really have the terms to be able to, I didn't have the lexicon to be able to use those terms and pinpoint this is anxiety, this is a panic attack, so on and so forth. I just would call it nervousness, right? I would have a track meet, a basketball game. I'd go on a date with a girl that I liked. I would just be like, I'm so nervous. And so in high school, I did have a panic attack on a date with a girl that I liked, that I was seeing. And that was a big moment where I was all shaken up. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to handle it. And so for many months, I was just thinking to myself, I can't experience that again. I have to avoid something like that at all costs. And I go off to college and I meet this new girl that I have taken a liking to. And she comes over one night and I have a panic attack in front of her. And I wake up the next day, right? That panic attack was not well received. It was a very awkward and humiliating experience, being in front of somebody that you like, and they basically reject you for this, right? I woke up the next morning and I was just so embarrassed and so distraught. And I thought to myself, okay, that's 2 panic attacks in a span of, let's say, 6 months in front of 2 women that I wanted to pursue relationships with. And for one, it's like, I wouldn't say necessarily the panic attacks were the cause of the relationships ending, but they were big influence. If maybe they would have ended for some other reason shortly thereafter, but they were a big important piece. And so I woke up that next morning and I said to myself, this is something that I don't have a handle on and it is eating me away, right? And so I realized that I needed to get a grip on whatever this thing was. And that was a moment of clarity for me to say, I got to go do this work to figure out whatever it is that I'm dealing with. I would now say, right, get a grip on my mental health, figure out anxiety, that sort of thing. Let me give that other first breakthrough or moment of clarity that I wanted to mention was fast forward 7 years later, still dealing with anxiety, still had, I guess I had started to put some of the wheels in motion, but didn't put it all together and didn't totally know exactly, like I didn't have my repertoire down, if I can use that term, right? So I'm going through this anxious episode of, surprise, surprise, there's another woman in my life and I'm anxious about it, and this woman had gone away. She had gone away for the summer, and it's kind of one of those situations where it's just like, I was a young kid and I was just really excited about the prospect of this relationship. It was all I could think about, like when you're in love, that tends to happen. And so, I was so anxious about it. It was all I could think about every day. And those panic attacks, those memories they keep coming back into my mind. And all I can think about is I've put so much pressure on myself and this relationship. And when she comes back, I'm going to have a panic attack in front of her, and boom, it's all going to go to crap once again. Right. And so I was sitting in a client's office at that point in 2015, and kind of a light bulb went off in my head. And it was just me saying to myself, I have been doing this thing, as in running these patterns in my mind and spinning the wheels in my mind over these things that I care about. And, it's somewhat of a common and natural thing to do, but I've been doing that to such a large degree for so much time. And, this kind of the narrative that we have in our heads, right? That voice was saying to me like, dude, you have to get out of your head. You have to stop spinning those wheels in your mind. And it was this breakthrough moment where, I had been doing a lot of reading and introspection and all that. And kind of in this moment of clarity, these different ideas came to me to say, these are different ways that you could get out of your head when you're feeling anxious. And so it was cool. I wanted to give both of those answers to say, the first one was kind of like the beginning of the journey, me saying, this is really important. I got to figure this out. And the second one was more, I have had a literal breakthrough or an actual breakthrough. This is how I'm going to actually move forward and handle this thing moving forward.
Love it. And we'll get into some of the tips because I want to hear some of the things that you've done to handle it. I want to go back to something that you brought up, and you brought up the term pressure. You put so much pressure on yourself. And I think that is a common theme. I see it so much. I see it in my son. I see it in myself. Why do you think we put so much pressure on ourselves? Because we know it's not going to serve us, but we continue to do it.
I think I could talk about this for many hours. I'm trying to give more of a succinct answer. I think there's kind of two things that come to mind, right? One is there is a fear that builds inside of us that says, if you don't work hard or if you fail at pursuing this thing that you want to pursue, it's going to mean that you're going to experience a lot of pain. And so in some ways, we're like, let's dial up the intensity and the temperature so that way we push ourselves and motivate ourselves to work harder to ensure that we avoid that pain, right? And in some ways, that kind of works, right? If you're like, okay, like this is really important to me, I need to remind myself to keep working hard. It's all in serving, we're trying to avoid that fear. So I think I do see why we do that to ourselves. I guess the other piece, right? Some of it's external too. When people, if you're on a team at work or whatever it may be, and they're like, hey, we got this deadline, we want to make sure that we hit this date or whatever, then that pressure, you just feel it, and in some ways you internalize it and you say to yourself, like, it's mostly subconscious, but we're like, okay, if I keep driving the bus at a fast speed, we're eventually going to get there. I think the difficulty, and something that you alluded to in the intro of the show, right, is you can only drive the bus so fast for so long before you burn out, before you run out of energy, before your nervous system is completely dysregulated and you have no idea what to do. And so at first it's like kind of a, yeah, let's go kind of thing. But that, in my opinion, is more of a short-term strategy than it is a long one, right? That's kind of looking at it as a sprint when it's actually a marathon.
Yeah. The fun thing that I find interesting is as I talk with more people, this concept of being burned out, feeling overwhelmed, pressure, anxiety, it is so prevalent. I would say probably 4 out of 5 people are feeling it on some level, yet we don't talk about it. And I feel like there is this shroud of shame around it where, people, they don't want to. I know I went through it after my son was born and I had postpartum depression. Now that was 20 years ago, but the idea was I didn't feel I could speak about it because it would make me seem weak. Do you find that, just in your being in watching people, and did you ever experience maybe the fear of raising your hand to say, hey, I'm struggling with this, because of any shame that would come with it?
Oh, like no doubt about it. I think, especially when it comes to mental health, right? There is a stigma. We can say we want to end the stigma. We can say that there shouldn't be a stigma, but there is, right? And the reality is that one of the reasons that stigma exists is that, like, unfortunately, right, there are mental health disorders that are very scary and lead to really bad possibilities. And you don't know which one of those the person that you're talking to is dealing with, right? If that person is suicidal, homicidal, schizophrenic, whatever, that's really, really scary, right? And you might need to protect yourself from that person. If somebody's dealing with anxiety or depression, like, those are much more common things. And I'm not trying to single anybody out, but I'm just saying, like those are like, hey, those diseases, if we want to call them that, those conditions are more products of the ups and downs of everyday life, or, life's difficulties, if you will. Getting back to the question, I would say, yeah, for me, early on, right, I think especially as men, when I was 18, when I was 25, these different eras of my life, I really didn't want to speak up. I really didn't want to raise my hand and say, I'm dealing with these things. To me, what really, I guess all I can really say is it was painful enough early on. And I didn't find solutions for myself. I went to therapy, I read a bunch of books, and like early on, I didn't have those insights that I felt like I needed. Right. And so eventually I was like, I'm going to be my own advocate here, and I'm going to figure this thing out on my own. I'm not saying I necessarily recommend that approach, but that's what happened. And eventually I got to the point, I had that breakthrough in 2015 where I was like, I am definitely making progress here. And I turned around and I was kind of like, you know what? I still am embarrassed on some level to speak about my anxiety, to speak about my depression, but I actually think it's going to help me. And I think it's going to help other people if I just kind of make the jump and put this content out there, as in my first book. And in some ways it was a little weird because there was a lot of people in my friend circle that I hadn't really had an intimate discussion with about my own mental health, but it started the conversation. And I would say at this point, like, I'm still not an expert at it, but I would say that, like, the more, it's just a process of getting more comfortable with all of this. You're honest with one person, you're honest with another person, you do that again and again and again. And 1 year later, 5 years later, 20 years later, you're just like, you know what? I have desensitized myself to this, as in, I'm not going to feel this shame because I know that these are normal conditions and it's something that I go through and everybody goes through. I also know that it's difficult to speak up, but at the same time, like, I'm just going to do it anyway because I've been doing it. Mm-hmm. So always hard to open up. That's part of life, right? But I guess it comes down to, like, thinking about what opening up could bring you. Could it bring you connection with other people? Could it bring you more insights? Could you get a referral to an expert or a doctor or somebody that could help you? I use this quote a lot. It comes from the mental health space, which is, you're only as sick as your secrets. And so if you are not talking to other people and being vulnerable with other people about your anxiety, depression, whatever it may be, look, that I'm not criticizing in any way, because that's a very difficult hand to be dealt. At the same time, every time that you make that decision to not speak up, that's one opportunity that you've cut yourself off from, right? Somebody that could help or lead you to a referral or to a resource that could inevitably help as well.
Right. And I love what you're talking about, is the idea that when we learn to speak up, it is just as much for us as it is for the others. And again, opening up the vulnerability as a mindset shift to, it's one of strength, not one of weakness. And knowing that when we share our story, again, it can really empower others and help others grow. So I think that's wonderful. I want to switch over now to some of the things and the tactics. You had mentioned that when you were going through the second cycle and you're like, okay, now I'm going to take control and I'm going to make changes. What were some of the strategies or tactics that you worked on to help you, I'm not going to say get over it because it's always there, but again, face it?
Yeah, I think some of it, right? And there's so many different angles to come at this from that it's kind of hard for me to choose one, but I will try to do that in the sake of concreteness. So in the subject of anxiety, the word the word really is management, right? From the standpoint of like, we are human, we live life. Life is full of ups and downs. Even if you get a grip on your anxiety, there are going to be moments and there's going to be events in your life that just bring you some anxiety. I hate to break it to you, but right, that's human nature. We have these drives within us. We have the mechanisms inside us that can breed fear and breed anxiety. And so it really comes down to how well can you manage that emotion when it comes up? Also, like, can you make it so that you don't get yourself into that emotion as often, right? And so why I frame it in that context is kind of doing a shameless plug again on my first book. Is my first book was a product of, those two breakthroughs that I had, and then all kind of that I described earlier, and then all the work that happened in between those breakthroughs and even a little bit after, right? And so what I basically said to myself and what became a little bit of my own framework for managing this stuff was, okay, you basically need two broad categories of tactics, which is the first one is you are anxious right now. How are you going to manage that anxiety in this moment? The second is you might not be anxious today, but there are things on the horizon that are, kind of coming into view that might make you anxious pretty soon. How do you make it so that you don't tip over into that anxiety? And so the idea is we want to make sure that you're able to get yourself out of anxiety when it arises, but we also want to make sure that anxiety arises a little bit less often. Sure. And so my first book is basically divided into two parts, each part trying to attempt to help the reader with each of those two categories. So to keep things concrete, and one of the things I talk about a lot on podcasts is the first half of the book, I introduced this framework called the 10 steps to getting out of your head. It's basically just a list of 10 simple tactics you can use when you're feeling anxious to walk back some of that fear. And so maybe let's just walk through a couple of those tactics right now and leave folks with something that they can chew on after they listen. So I always talk about this one. It is simplistic, but it's really important, right? And so step one in the process is to breathe. Let me give a little bit of a primer or extend this one a little bit, which is basically when we go into the fight or flight state, which is, part of our, it's a product of our nervous systems, the sympathetic nervous system, we get all, kind of jazzed up, or we get hyper aroused, like aroused as in like the body gets excited, prepares for threat and action, right? And so when that happens, typically, we start breathing a little bit more shallow, and then we get to the point where, because our sympathetic nervous system has activated, it becomes hard for us to think clearly, right? If you think about the fight or flight nervous system and the other terms that it gets thrown around as, sympathetic nervous system, that sort of thing, that system is designed to keep you safe and alive, right? And so the examples that I always give are around animals in the wild. And we say, if you were in the woods and a bear came across your path, your fight or flight nervous system would activate and say, run for your life or fight this bear, And so what happens today is proverbial bears come across our paths, right? We have a meeting that gets put on our calendar a week from now with our boss. We think about how are we going to pay our bills when, the bank account is not as padded as we like it to be. And so that anxiety arises and we are faced with a quote unquote bear, right? So the fight or flight nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system activates, and then we feel that anxiety. And so why I tell folks to breathe, even though it's very simplistic, is anatomically speaking, when you breathe out, get a full exhale, you actually send a signal to your body that things are okay and that the sympathetic nervous system can calm down a little bit. And the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest nervous system, can come back online a little bit. And so when we focus on our breath and we get that deep exhale, we're starting to say to the body, okay, fight or flight nervous system, I know this thing's a little scary. I know I've got that meeting on my calendar, but we need to calm down right now. This is not the time to bring the fear about, to bring the anxiety about. The great thing about the breathing, again, even though it's simplistic, is once we get that deep exhale and we start to calm our sympathetic nervous systems, and then the parasympathetic nervous system starts to come back online, the brain regions associated with critical thinking also come back online. And so when we're frantic, right, when we're all frazzled and anxious, it often seems as though we're like, I don't know what to do. I can't do this. I can't do that. And that is part of the system design, right? And so what we want to do is we want to get ourselves back to a little bit more of that calm state with the critical thinking. And then at that point, we can say, okay, I'm anxious right now. Let me go back. Let me pull out my steps. Let me walk through the rest of them and keep working through this emotion rather than just having that, it's, I can't say it, but you can see me wanting to do this kind of thing, right? So that's step one. Just to leave folks with something else, let's jump into another random one. And let's go with number 7, which is get back to the present moment. So I often say, right, like anxiety is basically us projecting out into the future something bad that might happen. And so, again, kind of simplistic, but if you think about anxiety, and it's like, it's impossible for us to be anxious about something that has already happened because we know what the outcome was. If we have something that's scary that's off in the future, there's all these possibilities that are running through our mind saying, what if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? Obviously, those possibilities are scary. We don't want them to happen. We don't want to have to endure them, anything like that. Yet at the same time, right, it's like whatever is going to happen is going to happen. And so we have to get ourselves to this point where we say, yes, those possibilities exist. They're off in the future. But instead of me projecting myself mentally to those moments, to those events, and generating more of that feeling of anxiety, I'm going to find a way to stay present, to be focused on what's happening in the moment right now, right? And so when folks often, there's a term that's kind of popular in the mental health space talking about grounding skills. Grounding skills are basically getting back into the present moment, right? So when people say, put your feet on the floor, connect to your breath, connect to your senses, put a drink in your mouth, feel the drink going around your mouth, taste that drink, see something in your field of vision, connect to that thing, you are getting right back into what's happening right now and detaching from what might happen in the future, aka the product of your anxiety. So I like to, throw those ideas around there. There's 8 other helpful ones that are in the book as well, but I do want to keep things succinct and give people something else to look into when they grab the book.
Well, what I really love and appreciate is that you brought in a little bit of the science of helping us to understand why it happens, and then also some of the practical tools to be able to face it. And I think that that's really great. And I appreciate the simplicity of these because these are things that all of us can do and just, really just takes a moment or two, but puts us back in control. So this has been really eye-opening because as we talked about, this is something that most of us have not been taught. And it's something that is not being shared as much. And it's real, they're with the age of technology, everything is moving so fast. There is a lot of pressure on us. And I don't know if that pressure is going to go away, but like you said, it's in how we manage it. And we have to control it for ourselves. It's the old adage of you can't control what happens. All you can control is your response to it. And we have to have better tools and strategies to help us manage those responses. So I appreciate what you are bringing. I know you've written some books. I know that you are out there talking and sharing this. So Brian, I would love to ask and have you share, what is next for you? What is something else that you're working on that we want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I wish I had more exciting stuff. Obviously do a lot of podcasting, so folks can check me out on whatever podcast app that they use, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'm currently working on a new edition of my first book, which I've been working on for a while. My full-time job is actually in software development. Gotta keep the lights on somehow. So I'm trying to get that done. And then honestly, I'm looking for a sign that tells me to, go full time into the writing, because honestly, it's something that is really near and dear to my heart. I'm very passionate about it. I love helping people. I'd love to be able to help more people. To your point of how stressful things are these days, right? It's like inflation has been hot the last few years. The cost of buying a house is super high. And so I think we're all trying to make ends meet. I'm no different there, just trying to make it so that I can not only put food on the table, but also try to, do a little bit more with my writing and my content and that sort of thing. So that's what I'm looking to do. I don't, obviously not a super concrete update there, but I don't know, in the next year or two, I'd love to go full time and really just start trying to help as many people as I can. Because right now it's more of a nights and weekends sort of endeavor.
Fantastic. Well, I know there's great things on the horizon for you, and I can't wait to see the new addition to your book. We're going to put all of your information in the show notes so people can go and find you where they need to find you, get your books. And I have one last question before I let you go today, Brian, and that is sitting where you sit today, learning everything that you've learned up to this point in time. How do you define success for yourself today?
I love this question. And it makes me think, how do I evaluate myself as successful, right? How I define success would be pretty simple. It would say, I would say, am I living my life according to the values that I have chosen for myself? I wrote down some values that I have chosen for myself. And I encourage listeners to possibly do this themselves, to be like, hey, I can create a little bit of a North Star to then ask myself on any given day or any given month, am I abiding by the values that I have set forth for myself? So my values, subject to change, but fun, excitement, health, connection, and meaning. And then, right, I can just go back and I can say, am I having fun doing what I'm doing right now? Am I excited about it? Am I generally doing things that are health promoting, mental health, physical health, all that? Am I connecting with other people, my friends, my family, people in my audience? And then is the work that I'm doing meaningful for me? Do I care? Right. So combination of following the values, but then also the success piece is, am I living on my terms? Right. And obviously I think for most of us, it's very hard to do that. We have obligations, we have responsibilities, but can I look back and can I say, yeah, I kind of did it the way I wanted to, given the hand that I was dealt?
And I think the more that you're in tune with your values, that's going to help you because, like you said, at the end of the day, you can ask yourself, if these are my values, did I live in alignment? That's one of the ways you can know you're doing it on your terms. So, Brian,
alignment is that big word. I love that.
I know. And Brian, thank you so much. I appreciate your ability and your vulnerability to share, to be able to be like, hey, I'm not perfect. There were times where I was really struggling. And as uncomfortable as that was, using that as a pathway for others to maybe look at themselves and say, you know what, I can ask for help too. So I honor you, and I thank you for being a guest with me today.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
I'm always amazed at, every time I go out there, I'm finding more and more people that are sharing and talking about their struggles with depression, anxiety, and just feeling all of this pressure. And I think a lot of it's just coming out of society, technology, and as wonderful as some of these things can do, it's causing a lot of us to suffer from what I heard a term one time called comparisonitis. And we are always looking into the future. So I love one of the strategies that Brian gave us of how when you start to feel the anxiety coming in is to pause for a moment and really focus in the moment. Get out of the future thinking, get out of the past thinking, and get yourself grounded in the moment, because today is not your forever reality. And we need to look at those things. Looking at, your values. Are you living in your values? And when you're clear with those can be a compass to make sure that you are living on your terms and doing the right things. He talked about don't hide in the secrets. Don't pretend everything's okay. If something's not okay, speak up, because our secrets grow. And in a sense, they keep us prisoners and they keep us from going forward. And, I just think this idea of understanding that these items may not go away. You may always deal with depression, anxiety, overwhelm. They're always going to be there. It's in how are you responding, or in his terms, how are you managing them? So going and investigating some tools. And like Brian said, he has a whole book on it, and the ideas of breathing, getting into the present, all of those are grounding techniques, because the truth is, to be the best version of yourself, you've got to be mentally well. So taking care of yourself, it is not selfish. It is more the selfless thing you can do, because that's what's going to help you really show up as the best version and live the best life you can and do it all on your terms. So thank you for being here today. I really encourage you to share this message with others, because there are so many dealing with these pressures that we're talking about. And if we can give them a little bit of light, a little bit of love, it might help unlock them. So thank you for being here. Go to the show, rate it, review it, share it, and don't forget to come back for a next time. I'm Clara Capano, and this is Clarity in Action.